Hello, my name is Roger. I'm with Kinsta, and I'm joined today with my good friend Donata from Termageddon. Hey, Donata, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really great. I'm excited to have you here. We're going to talk today about everybody's favorite subject, privacy and their websites, and is Big Brother going to come and get me? Is the government going to come and get me? And I'm really happy that you're here to help guide us through maybe our paranoia, maybe our anxiety, and just bring us down to earth. And as a quick introduction for everybody, Donata is the president of a company called Termageddon, and Termageddon specializes in privacy policies and helping businesses and individuals figure out what they need to do on their website to protect not only themselves as a business, but also protect the privacy of their customers and just be good people in general. And so I'm really excited to have you here today. And, the first thing, of course, that I want to have you do, Donata, is introduce yourself to the audience and the group and just kind of let us know why we should be listening to you about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's probably not the most exciting conversation, but we're going to try to make it as fun as we can. But I'm Donata. I'm the president and legal engineer behind Termageddon, like Roger said. I'm an attorney licensed in Illinois, and on that kind of trend, I won't be providing legal advice today. So if you are looking for legal advice, you should talk to a lawyer in your area. I'm also a certified information privacy professional. And at the American Bar Association, I'm the chair of the ABA's e-privacy committee, member of the Cybersecurity Legal Task Force, and I'm also the new ABA representative to the United Nations. And I'm also a fellow at the American Bar Foundation as well.
I mean, that just sounds so impressive to me. I just want to say, like, that's amazing. As a quick side note, how did you become involved with the UN?
So I was actually a part of the ABA's Rule of Law initiative for a very long time, about 5 years now, and we were working in the South Asia region, trying to bring privacy laws there, explaining to authorities how to enforce those laws, how to provide guidance, and we also taught individuals about their privacy rights too, as well as attorneys in different bar associations and things like that. And as a part of that work, a role opened up to be the UN representative, and I was appointed to that role by the ABA's president.
Wow. Okay. All right. So, suffice it to say, you're an expert on this subject matter.
I try to be, yeah.
Okay. So, this is great. As a lawyer, you're able to work with clients and I'm sure charge really nice money for advising and consulting businesses on this. What made you decide to start up a service business like Termageddon?
Sure. So before Termageddon and all of that, I was actually working at an agency. So we were building websites and applications, and that's how I met my husband. And that company was bought out, and unfortunately I didn't get a job at the new company. And so I was finishing up law school, and I decided to start a private practice. So I was helping businesses with contracts, business formations, that kind of stuff. And my clients had questions about their websites. So, they would say, hey, I just got this website built for me. I need a privacy policy. I need a terms of service. And this was before all of the complicated privacy laws went into effect. This is actually before GDPR and all these other things. And I said, yeah, sure, I can write this for you. Let me look into this. And I noticed that I was asking them very similar questions like, what personal information are you collecting? What are you doing with that information? Do you sell it? Do you share it? Who do you share it with? And I had these like 10 templates that I would Frankenstein together into one policy. And to be honest with you, it was terrible, terrible process. It was very repetitive. It was really boring. And I was just like, there's got to be a way to automate this. And I was talking to my husband, and he was an agency owner, and his clients would be like, hey, can you copy and paste my competitor's privacy policy for me? And he's like, I'm not really comfortable doing that. So we were talking about this over dinner, very romantic conversation. And we're just like sharing our frustrations with this. And we're like, we should create a software business that does this for people. Like, there's so many people who can't afford paying a lawyer for this. There's so many agencies and web designers who are getting these questions and don't know the right answer. Like, we should combine both of our problems, and that's how we came up with Termageddon.
Excellent. I love the story. I love the romantic side to the story, and jokingly, right? But also, I'm married, and having the projects that you work on together with your partner is always awesome. And the fact that you guys have been able to create a whole company out of this is really amazing. And I think what's also interesting to your point is that not only are people not necessarily excited about talking to lawyers, but even before that point about the copy and pasting of an existing privacy, how many, like I just try and think of how many websites that are probably doing that, and we're going to get into why you shouldn't do that. But I think a service like Termageddon that allows someone to just easily come to the site, sign up, click some buttons, give some information, and then get an actual privacy policy, like that's just got to be so much more beneficial for the community as a whole than having to, find who's even a privacy lawyer, right? Because there's so many types of lawyers. All right, so moving into the nitty gritty here, and we've got kind of some structure here. Getting into the high level overview, I think the first big question that we should start at is, what exactly is personally identifiable information, PII for those in the industry, and how are websites collecting it either knowingly or unknowingly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to share just a quick slide here. A lot of website owners just assume that they're not collecting personal information or personally identifiable information, so they don't need to worry about this. Or maybe they're assuming, I'm not collecting social security numbers, or I'm not collecting credit card information, so I don't really need to worry about this. So I think really this is a great question. This is the best way for us to start to kind of get on the same page about what's actually being protected by these laws. So personally identifiable information, or PII, also sometimes referred to as personal information or personal data, is any information that could identify a specific person or any information relating to an identifiable person. So websites, especially small business websites, collect PII all the time. So PII would be anything like names, emails, phone numbers, physical addresses, IP addresses, device identifiers, anything like that. And if you have certain features on your website, it's almost guaranteed that you're collecting PII. So if you have a contact form that asks somebody to submit like their name, email, or phone number, if you have an email newsletter subscription form to subscribe to your email list, if you have e-commerce forms for people to purchase, a form requiring somebody to create an account, and then also if you have analytics like Google Analytics, or you have advertising features like the Meta Pixel, all of those would be collecting PII. Now, collecting PII, there's nothing wrong with collecting PII. I would say that pretty much every single modern website out there is going to be collecting it. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that PII is protected under privacy laws, and those laws will dictate the exact compliance requirements that your website needs to meet. So again, if you have these forms, if you have analytics or advertising, you're collecting PII, which means that you do need to pay attention as to what these privacy laws are.
Excellent. I love the succinct description there. And so what we're talking about to help frame it for everybody is, whether you have a form or you're doing any type of analytics, and it depends on the analytics, right? Because there are analytics programs that don't collect this information, and we can talk about that at a later point too. But so even if I'm doing a blog, right, and I'm writing recipes, and maybe I'm not really trying to monetize it, but I've added Google Analytics to the site because I was told that, oh, hey, this is a great way to track it. I need to be aware that I'm now at risk potentially to be fined, or I don't know what the technical term is in the law, but in violation of the privacy laws, I need to make sure that I'm aware of that.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so now that we've established, okay, this is what we're collecting, And if we've decided, yes, we want to continue to collect this information, now we need to start paying attention. And so, the follow-up question now is, why is it important to determine which privacy laws apply to you, and how can a business do that, right? I mean, if I'm sitting here in Colorado, why is GDPR important to me? Why is California's privacy law important to me?
Sure. So privacy laws don't really care where your business is located. So the purpose of having privacy laws and passing privacy laws and enforcing them is to protect residents of a particular state or country. So if you're collecting personal information from other states or other countries, or you're doing business there, or you're tracking people there, that's when those privacy laws can apply to you, regardless of whether or not you actually ever step foot in that state or country. So privacy laws doesn't matter based on your location. Most laws don't exempt revenue amount, so it doesn't matter how much money your business is making, how many employees you have, the amount of PII you're collecting, or whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit business. So there's a variety of different laws that can apply to a business, and the reason why it's so important to figure out what laws apply to you first is because those laws will dictate the requirements that you have to meet. So for example, some laws may require you to obtain consent prior to tracking an individual for Google Analytics. Some laws may not require you to do that. So if a law that does require you to do that, that means that if that law applies to you, that means that you will, for example, need to have a cookie consent banner. Or if another law applies to you, this means that your privacy policy needs to say these 10 very specific things. Or if it doesn't apply to you or another applies to you, those disclosures could be completely different. And that's why it's important to figure out what laws apply to you, because, for example, a lot of people assume that your privacy policy is just random information, just random legalese, just spewed onto this document, and it doesn't matter what it says. Unfortunately, that's not true. So privacy laws have a very specific list of disclosures your privacy policy needs to make. And those disclosures are not necessarily matched up with other laws. So some laws in the US may require you to say whether you sell personal information. GDPR does not require you to do that. So a lot of people will assume, well, if I'm compliant with GDPR, I'm compliant with all other US privacy laws. That's actually not true, because there's a lot of disclosures that are required in the US that are not required in the EU, and vice versa. So really, the first thing in compliance with this that a business needs to do is figure out which privacy laws actually apply to you. And you can do that by asking yourself a series of questions, like whose PII am I collecting? So for example, can people from California submit the form on my website? Where do you offer goods or services? So for example, do you ship to the European Union? Do you ship to the United Kingdom if you're selling goods? Or do you accept clients from those countries? Where are your customers located? And who do you track online? So this is a great example of certain tools making you subject to privacy laws. So for example, like GDPR will apply to you if you're offering goods or services in the EU, or you're tracking the behavior of EU residents online. So let's say I'm a very local business. I just sell things within my state. If I have Google Analytics and people from EU go to my website and they get tracked, GDPR applies to me, things like that. So, right now there's over 30 privacy laws that can affect websites and their compliance requirements. We won't go through all of them just because I don't want everybody to fall asleep here. But I'll give you a couple examples. Nevada Revised Statutes Chapter 603A will apply to you if you're collecting the personal information of residents in Nevada and doing business there. So let's say I'm selling books and people from Nevada can submit their information on my website and purchase a book. Boom, Nevada's privacy law applies to me. On the other hand, CalOPA, one of California's privacy laws, will apply if I'm collecting the personal information of California residents, even if I don't do business there. So let's say somebody from California could subscribe to my email newsletter list. That privacy law applies to me as well. And it's important to figure this out because there are very high fines for non-compliance. They start at $2,500 per website visitor. So let's say I have 100 website visitors from California. that fine is calculated as 2,500 times 100. So it can balloon really, really quickly. And we're actually seeing businesses getting getting sued for noncompliance. So for example, businesses outside of California have been sued under SIPA, the California Invasion of Privacy Act, for tracking people through chat or through pixels like the Meta Pixel without their consent. So it's not just fines, it can be lawsuits as well.
Yikes. First of all, it's Halloween is coming up, and now you got me scared.
I really need to like create a Halloween costume that's like my privacy bill tracker and just wear that. I think that would go over well. A lot of people would be frightened.
I love it. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm already terrified. As a quick aside here, I'm in the US. I violate GDPR. Who cares? They can't come after me, right?
Yeah, so they actually can. So for people who are interested in this, I would recommend checking out the website enforcementtracker.com. I'm not affiliated with them, but I really should be because I quote their website all the time. And that's basically a website that collates all of the privacy fines that have been issued under GDPR. And if you spend some time on the website, you're going to see some really interesting things. So the first thing you're going to see is that companies outside of the EU have been fined for this. I was actually on a webinar with one of the regulators from the EU, and the way they justify this is because you're making money or you're gaining value from the data of residents of the EU, right? So you need to follow their laws because you're gaining value from those countries. And two, really, really small businesses have been fined. So we've seen businesses that are one-person shops. We've actually seen individuals getting fined. They're not even a part of any business, but they've been fined for GDPR noncompliance. So it's really interesting. A lot of people assume, oh, it's only these really large companies that Facebook, Meta, LinkedIn are getting fined. No, if you actually look at the tracker, you'll see individuals getting fined for thousands of euros. It's just the stuff doesn't make it into the news because it's not as exciting as like a multi-billion-dollar fine.
Sure. Okay, wow. And so, as a U.S. citizen, and if we're getting too legalese here, tell me to stop or that you can't answer it. But how can the EU come after me if I'm sitting here in Colorado? Like, do I really need to be worried about enforcement?
Yeah, so what they would do in that case would be issue you a fine, and then you would have to pay that fine. Or like, let's say if you ever do end up going to the EU, let's say you're going to France on some romantic getaway, that's when they can enforce that on you, right? I think it's important to note that, U.S. companies have been fined for GDPR noncompliance and have been required to pay this. But it's also important to note that this is a reputational risk as well. As consumers are paying more attention to privacy, they're actually willing to make purchasing decisions based on that. So if consumers aren't comfortable on your website because they think you're selling their PII, you're not providing the information, you're tracking them without their consent, they're going to leave your website and go somewhere else to make their purchase. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but it's not just the fines that are concerning, it's also the business impact of, number one, getting fined is a reputational issue. And two, consumers are going to go somewhere else if they're not feeling safe on your site.
All right, excellent. Those are great points for sure. We're now moving into kind of getting more into the details. And so understanding privacy policies and compliance. What are the key privacy policies / cookie consent banner / cookie policy that every business should have on their website? And what should these policies include?
Sure. So there's three kind of distinct things that I think website owners should be thinking about when it comes to websites and policies. So the first one is the privacy policy. That's the one that most people are familiar with. If you go to the bottom footer of any website, usually they will have the privacy policy. And basically what it is, it's a document that explains your privacy practices, like what PII are you collecting, what you do with that PII, and who you're sharing it with. And there's two things that a privacy policy needs to do. So first of all, like we talked about earlier, it needs to include all of the disclosures that are required by the privacy laws that apply to you. And then it also needs to accurately list your business and privacy practices. So businesses get in trouble for both of these. So the first one, if you're missing disclosures in your policy, not compliant. The second one, you could have all of the required disclosures, but let's say they're not accurate. So let's say your privacy policy says that you're not selling PII and you actually are. That can be a fine. Or saying that you're not sharing PII and you actually are, that can be a fine as well. And by the way, sharing PII, extremely common. When we talk to clients and we ask them, hey, are you sharing the PII that you collect? Most of them will be really offended and say, no, of course not. I would obviously never do that. Who do you think I am? But in reality, most businesses will share PII. So for example, let's say you have an email marketing list and you put that list onto MailChimp or Constant Contact and you're using an email provider to send that email, you're sharing those emails. Or if you have a CMS that you're using and it stores a copy of the form in the back end, you're sharing that PII with a CMS. So very, very common, nothing wrong with it. Almost every single website does this, but you do need to disclose that. The second policy.
I want to stop you there just for a second on that. So, that is a huge thing, and I hadn't thought about that before, right? Because lots of people are using HubSpot.
Yeah.
So, in that case, you need to say that you are sharing PII. Wow, that's. There's one takeaway right there for me that I wasn't aware of before. So
absolutely, yeah. Most people don't think about that, but you are inputting the data into a third-party system, and they have access to that data, so you are sharing it with them. And yeah, most businesses don't think about that, but that is the case.
Wow. Okay. All right. Sorry for the interruption. Please continue.
No problem. And then the second one is the cookie policy. So if you have cookies and tracking technologies on your site, so let's say you have analytics, you have advertising, bless you, you have reCAPTCHA, things like that. Those are all placing cookies and tracking technologies on the user's device. So if you are doing that, you will need to have a cookie policy that lists all of the cookies that you have on the site by category. So essential, functional, marketing. And you also need to list the name of the cookie, who's providing it, whether it's a first party or third party cookie, its purpose, so what are you using it for, how long it stays on the user's device, and then how people can opt out. And then lastly, the cookie consent banner, which is not a policy. This is that pop-up that comes up on people's websites that everyone hates, including myself, but that's the requirement. And basically it stops the placement of certain cookies on the user's device until that user consents. So until the user clicks accept, they're not being tracked by these cookies. So this applies to functional and marketing cookies. So unless they click accept, they're not actually tracked by those cookies. So those are some of the key things in terms of policies in the banner that most businesses should think about.
Excellent. When it comes to cookies, this has been an ongoing debate going on for a while. Cookies have been devalued a lot recently by Google and Apple, where they're just blocking them outright. What are some common misperceptions about cookies that people aren't thinking about, or maybe they're inadvertently have cookies on their website, but they're just they didn't set up the site, or maybe an intern added something to the site that's suddenly putting cookies out there. Talk to me a little bit more about where companies are missing the mark here.
Sure. So I think the first thing is not knowing that there are cookies on your website. So most sites will use cookies. So that is important to note. There are ways in which you can check whether your site has cookies. There's a lot of different scanners out there that can tell you, or you could just click inspect on your website, look at the application, and then see what cookies are being placed. Also, if you have tools like Google Analytics, reCAPTCHA, Facebook Pixel, just know that you have cookies as well. Another very common mistake that a lot of people will make is that they assume that all cookies need consent. So essential cookies actually don't need consent. So cookies that are necessary for the operation of the website don't need consent. So if without that cookie the website won't load, you don't need consent for that. But you do need consent for functional and marketing cookies. And then another really big mistake is that people assume that certain cookies are essential when they're really not. So we've talked to business owners who are like, well, analytics is essential for my business. That's fine, but it's not an essential cookie. It's a marketing cookie, and you still need to obtain consent. So misclassifying cookies is a big deal. Just because it's essential for your business does not necessarily mean that it's an essential cookie. It's only an essential cookie if the website itself won't load without it.
Okay. All right, so moving into the proactive benefits of staying compliant. We've talked about PII. We need to be careful with people's data and how that then now affects us with laws. We've talked now about you need to have a privacy policy. It sounds like you probably need to have a cookie policy, and potentially you need a banner. Now we're kind of moving into, okay, we've got all these things. How are we going to avoid fines? And what's like the proactive benefits that they gain from staying compliant with privacy laws?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple different ways in which, there are some consequences for failing to comply. So I do have a slide here with a couple different examples of consequences here. And some of these are large companies, some of these are small. So you may have heard of this, you may have not. But like great example, Sephora, $1.2 million fine for violations of the California Privacy Rights Act because they did not tell consumers that their PII was going to be sold. And then whenever consumers reached out to them and said, hey, I would like to be opted out of my PII being sold, they didn't process those requests. So they didn't stop selling the PII even after the consumer said, please stop selling it. Black Tiger Belgium, a company in Belgium, fined 174,000 euros because they failed to inform consumers in their privacy policy that their PII was being processed and how to opt out of that processing. So one of GDPR's requirements is to inform consumers that, hey, we're processing this particular PII. This is how you contact us to exercise your privacy rights and opt out of that, right? And they didn't do that. Canal Plus Group, 600,000 euro fine because in their privacy policy, they didn't tell them how long the PII was retained. So GDPR, you do have to tell consumers how long the PII would be retained. So for example, we'll keep your PII for 7 months, or we'll keep your PII until you unsubscribe from our newsletters. And they also didn't tell consumers the categories of third parties with whom PII was shared. So this is a huge kind of argument with privacy. So some people in their privacy policy will say, we share your PII with HubSpot, Google Analytics, we share it with our CMS, we share it with our email sending tool. But others would put categories of third parties. So it would be, instead of saying HubSpot, we share it with customer management systems. So both of these routes are actually correct. I personally prefer the categories because if I switch vendors, I don't have to update my privacy policy. So if I switch from MailChimp into Constant Contact, I don't have to make updates because I already told people I'm going to share it with an email marketing tool. But Canal Plus Group failed to inform the categories of third parties with whom PII was shared. So they didn't say anything. They just said, we may share your PII with third parties. Well, that's not enough to meet the requirements of GDPR. WhatsApp was fined 225 million euros because they failed to inform individuals of the legal basis of processing PII and how PII was shared and processed by other Meta companies. So legal basis, GDPR actually prohibits the processing of PII altogether unless you have a legal basis. So for example, like consent, or I formed a contract with this customer and I need to perform their PII to perform that contract, or I need to send them a contract. And actually before we started, Raj and I were discussing how LinkedIn was just fined 310 million euros because they used the wrong legal basis for targeted ads. So all of these kinds of things add up. And then also you have the California Invasion of Privacy Act. This is really new. So SIPA was actually a privacy law from the Cold War era, if you can believe it or not, that prohibited the eavesdropping on landline phone conversations between a resident of California and somebody else. So we're going like way back to the Cold War, but some crafty attorneys have pushed some cases through that basically decided that SIPA applies to websites. So if you have the metapixel and somebody from California visits your website and they're tracked by that pixel without their consent, you can get sued. So a lot of attorneys in California have been filing demand letters asking businesses to pay $20,000 or more. So we've seen anywhere up to $70,000 for violations of SIPA. And, if the business doesn't pay, a couple months later, they get a lawsuit. So that's kind of the new thing that's been going around. So that's why you're probably going to see a lot more cookie consent banners in the US. So that's just another example of lawsuits here. And then I'm also linking to enforcementtracker.com. So that has more examples of GDPR fines.
Excellent, excellent. So backing up a second here, I can talk about how, at Kinsta, I actually was involved with setting up our GDPR compliance so that when somebody requests that we delete their data, there's a processes, right? Because that data is sitting in different places, right? We have a chat system, we have a CRM, and so we have to coordinate making sure that we delete all of that. Are you seeing instances where companies are not following through and not completely deleting the data and they get in trouble for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're not a business that's the size of Kinsta, nobody's expecting you to have this huge, super nice, really well designed, easily usable like privacy center that has like anything you would ever want to know about privacy, right? Like, obviously we're expecting that from larger companies like Kinsta, who's a hosting company that's processing the data of a lot of people. But for small businesses, that's not going to happen, and that's okay. So for small business, the most important thing here is that your privacy policy says what rights people have and where those rights apply. So for example, like, are you offering these rights to everyone that visits your website or just residents of the EU? And also where you can be contacted to exercise those rights. So that's kind of the first thing that you need to do. And obviously the rights that you offer will depend on the laws that apply to you, because different laws offer different rights. And then the second part is monitoring that inbox. So let's say I have privacy@termageddon.com. I need to monitor that inbox and see whether or not people submit requests, and I need to respond to those people. So if somebody emails me and says, hey, delete my data, I need to have a response, right? I can't just ignore it. That's what a lot of companies get in trouble for, is ignoring these requests, first of all. And then second of all, you need to methodically enable those privacy rights. So if somebody says, hey, delete my data, I need to know where that data is stored. I need to go into all the places where all that data is stored and delete it from there. I need to know what exceptions there are. So for example, let's say this person has threatened to sue me. I can keep certain data because I need to prove certain things for a lawsuit. So let's say they say, oh, I never signed up for the service and you charged me $5,000. Well, I need to keep their registration form and I need to keep their flow where they actually purchased that service, right, for that potential lawsuit. But everything else I can delete. And then I also need to respond to the consumer, letting them know that their data was deleted and explaining to them, this is the data that we deleted, this is the data that we did not delete, and here's why. A lot of laws also require you in that response to say, if you have a complaint, or if you're not satisfied, please let us know. Or if you have a complaint, this is where you can file a complaint with a data protection authority, for example. So one thing that I do recommend businesses have is some kind of a checklist. So these rights, you have to respond and enforce those rights within a certain period of time. So you may only have 30 to 45 days to do this. So you don't want to be scrambling the moment somebody sends you a request. You kind of want to be prepared ahead of time. So at the very least, having a list of where all that data is kept, having some kind of checklist where you can go through and check everything methodically, and then having some kind of templated responses that you can adapt based on their needs.
This is really fascinating to me because, like I said, I had firsthand experience with this, and there are like everything you've pointed out is giving me flashbacks to like years ago when we set all this up, and just having a space where we are keeping certain information, like keeping the information that this request happened, right? But then also, like, when you send the message, the final message to the customer and saying, hey, by the way, this is the final message because we're deleting all of your data. So if you need to contact us, you have to contact us. Like, we don't have your email anymore.
Yeah.
It is fascinating, and I think I can see where this is where businesses get annoyed with these laws, because it's not clear, right? Like, nobody sends us a booklet with instructions of, hey, here's this law that just passed, and here's really clear instructions on how to comply to it, right? Like, that doesn't have, you have to hire a lawyer to do this. Um,
So, sorry, real quick, just a quick
yeah,
correction. So,
okay.
if you're in the United States, you're totally correct. With US privacy laws, you just have the text of the law, half of which is like, stolen from other laws. You may have some kind of very simple website by the Attorney General that provides very, very basic information. You probably don't have any guidance, or if you do, it's 3 years later and it goes into effect in 6 days, that kind of thing. But if you are in the EU or the UK, the data protection authorities have an extreme amount of resources. So, if you go to the UK Information Commissioner's Office, their website answers like pretty much any question you could have or would ever have or may ever think of about these laws. And they provide videos, they provide training, they provide clear answers, and if something's not answered, you can contact them and they will give you an answer. So other countries, I know EU, UK, Canada, and Australia do this, where you can contact the regulator and ask them a question, say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this in this way. Would this be compliant? And they will actually tell you if it's going to be compliant or not. Obviously, don't be like, I've stolen 3,000 people's data and I want to use it for marketing. But if you have questions, they will respond to you and they will give you very clear-cut, nice answers. And there is a lot of guidance and a lot of interpretation and examples and even screenshots and stuff. So for those laws, there are a lot of resources available, just so you know.
Okay, no, that's great to know. Being in the U.S., my assumption is always that there will be no assistance from the government, and you have to hire a lawyer, basically. Which sidetracking momentarily, I'm assuming this is because we have no federal privacy anything in the U.S. at this point. It's all the states trying to figure it out on their own.
So we do have federal legislation when it comes to certain types of data. So for example, like if you have healthcare data, the data of children, or financial data. So there are some federal laws protecting that, but there is no federal privacy law protecting regular PII collected by regular websites like names, emails, and phone numbers. So yes, that's why you're seeing all of these states propose and pass their own laws in the US to try to fill that gap and to try to protect consumers in their states. And I'm actually sharing my screen here. We do have a lot of proposed privacy bills in the US right now. So the legislative session has ended. Usually this is about 30-ish bills that have been proposed. And one of my jobs is tracking these bills because we update policies for new legislation. But at any time, you will see a lot of states propose and pass their own bills to fill that federal privacy law gap. So this is kind of one of the charts that we use that breaks down these bills and what they mean and what they would provide. It is important to note that all these bills would affect privacy policies. So if passed, privacy policy text would have to change. There would be new disclosures that would be required, so you'd have to amend your policy accordingly. And also other countries like UK, Canada, and Australia have proposed privacy bills that would amend the existing privacy laws and increase compliance requirements. So, if you're thinking, okay, I'm compliant with the UK Data Protection Act, it's been in effect for a while, I don't need to worry about any changes. There are actually pretty major changes that are proposed on a daily basis, and I do track all of them.
Well, and I think that, okay, so this, we're getting at 42 minutes here, so I want to kind of start wrapping things up, but this kind of feeds right into the marketing side of this webinar is how does Termageddon do all of this? Like, so I sign up with Termageddon, what's happening that next?
Sure. So what we do is we help businesses create their website policies and keep them up to date. So we have a couple different features that make us unique from other generators or templates or stealing privacy policies from other people. So we do include a privacy law identifier. So the first set of questions will actually help the system figure out which privacy laws apply to you and therefore what disclosures your privacy policy needs to have. We also help you figure out if you need a cookie consent banner and a cookie policy as well. So if you're just like, I don't know if I need that, we'll help you figure that out. And then the remainder of the questions are based around those disclosures, and they're about your business and your privacy practices. So like, what PII are you collecting? Do you sell it? Do you share it? Things like that. And then that information that you input are used to create your privacy policy disclosures. So it's based on those laws, and it's also based on your actual business and privacy practices. And then after your policies are created, we do track, or I track, privacy laws, bills, rules, regulations, and enforcement actions that can affect your policies. And we automatically update those policies as needed. And we have very comprehensive coverage. So we have over 24 privacy laws that we cover. And then we add laws all the time as new laws go into effect. So I know next year we have at least 6 updates in the pipeline there. And the pricing is $12 a month or $119 a year for all the policies and the cookie consent banners. You can change your answers to the questionnaire at any time. You're not charged for that. So let's say I wasn't sharing PII before, but after listening to this webinar, I actually determined that I am sharing PII. You can go in and change your answer from no to yes at any time. We don't charge based on law. It's all included. And then you can make changes to the text of the policies at any time as well.
Wow, comprehensive indeed. And just to like maybe give some perspective, if someone were to say, you know what, I just want to hire a privacy lawyer, what's kind of the going rate in the US for an hourly rate for a privacy lawyer right now?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I would say I would not want to discourage anybody from hiring a privacy lawyer. Termageddon, other generators, we can't provide you with legal advice because we're not law firms. We can't do that for you. So getting legal advice is really the best way to do things because then you have that guarantee of you got legal advice from somebody about this. It's very customized fit to your exact situation. In terms of pricing for attorneys, it depends on your area. So if you're going into downtown Chicago, you're going to be paying a lot more than Southern Illinois, right? Like a farming town, things like that. But pricing for privacy policies, the initial drafting, anywhere from $1,000 to $50,000, right? Depending on the size of your business and what you actually need. Usually we see that pricing around $5,000 for a small business. That's roughly what we see. But if you are hiring a privacy lawyer, I would also ask them, what's the charge for updating these policies? So as new laws pass, let's say the 6 new laws next year apply to you, how much are you going to be paying to making updates to your policy for those 6 laws? So you should be aware of the fact that that can be a recurring cost. You know, if your lawyer says, well, you know, I created this privacy policy for you, you don't need to update it, you're good to go, definitely major red flag. I would try to work with an attorney who specifically works in privacy. So business lawyers, there's a lot to keep in mind here. There's a lot to keep track of. They may not be paying as close attention to this as a privacy lawyer would. So make sure that you're working with a privacy lawyer if you do end up working with a lawyer on this.
No, I think that's great advice. And do you ever see people start working with Termageddon and then maybe they bring in a lawyer just to review everything and kind of sign off on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So people definitely do that. It's a lot cheaper than having your attorney write it from scratch. One of the features of Termageddon is that you can share your license with anybody. So you can actually share your license with your attorney. They can review how you answer the questions, make adjustments, review the text, and actually make adjustments to the text right from the Termageddon dashboard if they want to do that as well. So you're more than welcome to do that. We definitely encourage people doing that too.
Excellent, excellent. I think another question here is, what types of companies and individuals should really be considering Termageddon?
Sure. So really, it's anybody that is collecting personally identifiable information from their website. So if you have these forms, if you have analytics, if you have advertising tracking, that's when you need to have a privacy policy. So we work with businesses of all sizes, from a one-person shop to an airline. So we have businesses of all sizes, industries, and gamuts that we work with. A couple industries that we don't work with, so we don't offer a service to government websites because they're subject to different laws that don't apply to businesses, like the Freedom of Information Act. We also don't work with hospitals and individuals that are collecting healthcare information directly through their website. So if you have like a third-party portal where you're collecting PHI, totally fine, but we don't cover HIPAA. And then lastly, we don't work with large financial institutions such as banks. But everybody else, definitely welcome to use our service. Or if you have any questions about whether our service would be fit for your needs, definitely feel free to send me an email and I can let you know.
Awesome. So, one last thing. I know you've got a couple of specials, and I want to talk about those. And I think what's interesting about the specials is they're targeting two different people, right? So there's your end user businesses, but there's also agencies, and this is also a huge audience that Kinsta talks to, right? Is web agencies who are building these sites for businesses. Let's talk about these deals, but as you're talking about them, like, what are you doing for agencies?
Sure. So since my husband is one of the co-founders, he owned an agency, we definitely work with agencies a lot. So agencies are kind of the lifeblood of our business. So we do two things there. So one, we actually give web design agencies a free license, so you can test out our product, use our policies, see how it works, see whether it's a good fit for your clients, put it on your site. So that's the first thing we offer. And actually with Kinsta, we have termageddon.com/Kinsta, where you can get 2 free licenses if you register. So you can use one for your own website, give one to your favorite client, or use it for your pet project or whatever. And then we also offer agencies an affiliate and reseller program, so you can actually make more recurring revenue through recommending Termageddon to your clients. And we have a lot of different resources. Like, we have a website policies waiver that tells the client, hey, it's your responsibility to ensure that your website is compliant with privacy laws, not the agencies. And that kind of helps take some of that pressure and some of the liability off the agency. We also have pre-written email sequences and slide decks, so you don't have to worry about, how do I tell my clients about this, right? Like, you're not a privacy lawyer. You might be nervous, like, I don't know how to say this. So we do offer all of that as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, so I hope the agencies take a look at that. We're going to have links shared different places for people. And then we've also got a deal for business owners, end users that want to use the product.
Yeah, so if you're just a regular business that needs policies set up, maybe you don't have policies right now, or your policies aren't created the way they were supposed to be created, maybe you used a template, maybe it has a bunch of blanks, maybe you stole it off somebody else's website, you can register with Termageddon and use promo code Kinsta to get 10% off your first payment with us.
Beautiful. We did get a question from James in LinkedIn. Thanks for asking the question, James. He says, folks at Termageddon are awesome! !
Nice, thank you.
So that's nice. His question is, are there any privacy laws that are specific for nonprofits? And I'm assuming he's talking about the U.S.
Yeah, so there are privacy laws that will apply to nonprofits. So in the sense that, so there is no privacy law that only applies to nonprofits, but does not apply to for-profits. But there are privacy laws that do apply to nonprofits as well as for-profits. So nonprofits are not exempt from privacy law compliance in general. You will still need to comply with some laws. Not as many laws as a for-profit business would, but you still need to comply with some for sure.
All right, that's good to know. Thanks for the question, James. We appreciate the participation. Excellent, Donata, this is amazing. We're going to share links for the discounts. I've also got the enforcementtracker.com, which is the new scariest website on the internet. Uh, if people want to get in touch with you, like what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure. So you can send me an email. It's just my first name, donata@termageddon.com. You can also reach out via Twitter or LinkedIn or anything like that. And then you can find our company at termageddon.com.
Wonderful. Awesome. All right. Donata, thank you so much for honestly making what is generally like not an exciting subject actually interesting. And I would even say exciting. I mean, those fines are pretty exciting, like ooh, millions of dollars. I would rather avoid all of that. So this was great, very informative. I appreciate your time and energy, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.